not coming.
Good morning.
Okay.
I think Linda's going to be here.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, at some point, somebody switched them out.
Oh, God.
I had nothing to do with it, but I mean, I'm all for it. Yeah, they brought in the comfy ones. So
Oh, there's like a ton of,
the black ones
yeah, they're set up in like rows in there. So I wonder if they're doing something.
in the hub. Yeah, but this is like I think this was this way last week too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was?
hmm
Yeah.
I'm saying I'm all for it. I just don't know who did it.
How much I paid attention.
Yeah.
Blame it all on my roots.
She's from Texas.
You showed up in boots.
Ruined your black tire bear.
Did you go to that concert last year or 2 years ago?
At the,
Yes.
what is the stadium name?
Uh,
Call it, no, forget it.
the Reynolds Stadium.
Yeah.
Donald W. Reynolds.
Yeah, it was crazy because they're
Yeah.
only doing one entrance.
hmm
So it was kind of a hot mess. But it was great. It was a great concert.
But did you know that the he does the thing where he'll just like let the crowd pick a song,
Oh, no.
and so were you there for the whole thing? So there was some song that he sang, and he's talking to somebody in the crowd, and he's like, "Y'all really want us to sing, it's some old song from like one of his first albums on it." I don't know enough Garth Brooks to know. Anyway, that was some. I mean, mostly. I mean, I know from the South Side, from Green Valley, but as some of the young adults that we know, they were holding up this huge sign, saying, yeah, whatever, and he pointed up to him and stuff. I was like, yeah, and like they were up, like they turned the camera to him, they were up on the screen. Uh huh.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what the song is, but it was like one of her favorites when she was a kid growing up. And so
Crazy because Chad and Misty were there too.
never saw him.
But no, we did. There were like
Oh.
3 rows in front of us.
Oh, really?
Like out of all the seats that we could have chosen.
Yeah.
But
Did you know that they were going?
yes, yeah.
Okay. You just didn't know where they were sitting.
I just didn't know where they were sitting.
Yeah.
I just looked and I was like, there's Chad. There's Chad.
I know him.
I may be related to him.
My mom turns around.
Okay. Who can't get married?
Oh, I was telling her about the priest back home,
Oh.
that Marley wanted to just give my mom a hard time last June when we were up there. And
Uh-huh.
she goes, "Hey, Grandma, is that priest still single?" And my mom turns and says, "He can't get married."
So he's still single then? Yeah, he's still single.
Go for it.
So first things first, I got a special gift from Sharon this morning. Candy cigarettes.
See you with it.
Yeah, I'll do that later. But I can't remember. I can't even remember how we got on the topic. But I know we talked about candy cigarettes a few weeks ago. So I appreciate you. I don't even want to open. I don't want to break the seal because I'm like, oh, it just it's nostalgic. It's.
I did get a funny look from the saleswoman that sold it to me in Hattiesburg in her best Mississippi voice. She was like, "What kind of pastor do you have?"
the kind of pastor who appreciates candy cigarettes. So, yeah. That's funny. Okay. Revelation chapter 14. We've been in here for a few weeks, but we're going to get out of it today. Promise you. So, a lot of stuff going on in this chapter, and we've talked about the chapters leading up to this. We had the dragon, we had the 2 beasts, and then you kind of have the opposite of that here in chapter 14, where you have the lamb with 144,000. And we talked about them. We talked about their character traits, and then John sees these 3 angels, and so we've talked about them. And really, for the most part, they're just flying and calling out things that seem to be about to take place. So we've spent time on the 2 angels, and especially last week we talked about the second angel crying out that fallen is Babylon the Great. And so we were talking about exactly what does that mean, and there's different opinions, so I don't know that we ever firmly decided on exactly what that means. But we also kind of put a pin in it, put a bookmark there, because Babylon will be referred to again in chapters 17 and 18. So we may come back to 14 and kind of pick up a little bit more on it when we get a little bit further down the road.
Can I make just a quick comment?
Yes, ma'am.
I had an opportunity to listen to an archaeologist
Mm-hmm.
who had gone to Babylon and done a number of digs, and he said it's very large, it's about 2 miles,
Mm-hmm.
from wall to wall. There's a riverbed that goes in between. Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild, but that fell flat.
Mm-hmm.
It has never been occupied again as a city.
Mm-hmm.
There's a curse on it, and that it won't be rebuilt.
Yeah, well, there was, I know a significant portion of it was buried, for centuries, just, sand and dirt and build up. There's a lot of excavation to be done to kind of get back down to the core of it again.
Came and took a gate, the Ishtar Gate.
Okay,
Germany.
okay.
Yeah, and so the Iranian government, I believe it is, of antiquities, they want that.
They want to get it back. Yeah. Yeah, it was, back in ancient times, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon was listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So, yeah, it was a significant city for sure, and a just kind of a display of power and prestige and strength. And it also has the sore spot doesn't even really do it justice. Talk about like the kind of negative connotation that it had for God's people, specifically, being the nation that destroyed Jerusalem, that destroyed the temple and carried people away. And even God allowing that to happen, there's still this, for centuries afterwards, there's, like, if you're going to talk about, in a negative light, a group of people oppressing another group of people, in the Jewish mindset, that's the same thing as Babylon. So they referred to Rome. They referred to, even before Rome, they referred to some of the Greek empires as Babylon coming to take us over again. So, yeah, we're gonna dive a little more deeply into that. Like I said, when we get to chapter 17. So, we just kind of skimmed the surface a little bit when we talked about that last week, and then we had this third angel. This is at the very end of class last week. The third angel that comes out and proclaims in a loud voice that anyone who worships the beast, worships his image, and receives his mark will drink the wine of God's fury. And so I did not go back. I apologize. I didn't go back and listen to the end of class last week to know exactly where we left off. So did we cover thoroughly the third angel, or did we just kind of read it? Okay. So we'll start there, and then we'll get into kind of some of the same imagery as we get to the end of chapter 14 with wine and God's wrath and fury. So here's this angel that proclaimed. Here, let's just read it in chapter 14, beginning verse 9. A third angel followed him and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commands and remain faithful to Jesus." And then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," says the Spirit, "they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." And I know, I'm almost positive at the very end of class we talked a little bit about rest. Okay, so just a couple things. I don't have a whole lot on just this angel. There's just some powerful imagery here. Again, he gives these 3 categories: anybody who worships the beast, anybody who worships his image, and anybody who receives his mark on his hand and forehead is going to drink the wine of God's fury. So we've talked about the beast and the image already, and the people who, however you want to translate, the number 666 or what all that means. I mean, ultimately, it is people who are not part of God's saved people, and who are willingly following Satan and following his agents. These 2 beasts that are acting on his behalf. There's going to be punishment for them. They're going to drink the wine of God's fury. Okay, And it goes on. Besides just, I mean, you think about that imagery of basically, taking the cup and ingesting the liquid. I mean, it's something that they're going to be consumed by it. Like, you are going to receive the full brunt of God's wrath, God's punishment, right? But then it goes on to describe that a little bit and says that in verse 10, he will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever, and there is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast in his image or anyone who receives the mark of his name. That's some really painful, brutal kind of punishment for people. I mean, what do you think he's describing there? It sounds like hell, doesn't it? And what we see in other scriptures, it's interesting that he says that they're going to be tormented with burning sulfur before or in front of the angels and the Lamb. Is that what? I don't know. What kind of imagery does that bring up in your mind?
Harrison Ford movie.
A Harrison Ford movie?
Yeah,
How so?
Indiana Jones movies where
Yeah.
the guy drinks the stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Last Crusade. He drinks out of the wrong grail and he melts away.
I mean, that's exactly what it reminds me of.
Yeah. It's interesting that. Well, I guess kind of the reason I pointed out is it almost comes across, and I don't think this is what John means, but it almost comes across as if the Lamb and his followers are like spectators, almost like this is happening for show in front of them, and I don't know that John is trying to portray that in heaven one of the things that we get to do in heaven is look down and watch people being tormented. I don't think that's the message that John is trying to get across. Okay? But, so if that's not it, then what are we saying? Yes, ma'am.
Just a thought.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if the angels are part of that harvest that the Lamb has initiated
Mm-hmm.
in his wrath. So I see that as the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they are so much spectators, but that the results of God's purpose and plan have been fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
I read something out of Ezekiel this morning that it's not God's desire. He grieves because people are lost.
Right.
So to understand that, he is the perfect and righteous judge. And so this is the outcome of his perfect and righteous judgment.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, it's not something that necessarily God desires, but there are consequences of sin. There always has been. There's not only the separation, but the imagery that we get here is, there's torment. Is this just imagery, like, or is there actually going to be, burning and burning sulfur and that kind of thing? I don't know for sure. It seems like in other passages of Scripture, it seems like there's some kind of fire, some kind of torment that's being described. I don't think that it's necessarily like this picture of almost like the Roman Colosseum with, we're in bleachers around and we're looking down at these people being tormented for entertainment. I don't think that's what John is trying to convey here. I think it's just one of those things it would be kind of more along the lines of I am approving of this is not the right word, but I am I'm allowing it, and it has to happen, and it's happening in front of me, and I'm not turning a blind eye to this. This is not something that Jesus would be like, oh, what happened to these other people? Like, he's not caught off guard by it. He knows it's happening. The angels recognize that it's happening. They're allowing it to happen. And some of this imagery is that, it is the punishment that they're causing to happen. Not because they want it to happen, but because this is what people have brought on themselves by choosing to follow the beast instead of choosing to follow the Lamb. Remember, it's our choice. There was, in chapter 13, 12 or 13, I think it's 13, we talked about how there are people who see all the consequences. They recognize how bad it's going to be to follow the dragon and to follow these beasts that are following the dragon. And yet, they still don't turn away from it. Like, they know what the consequences are going to be, and they still choose to follow anyway. And the ones who were following the Lamb made that choice. That was their choice to follow the Lamb, right? And so this is more of a case of the Lamb being here and witnessing, I guess is the best way to look at it, witnessing the consequences of people who didn't choose him. Now, here's another thing about this. It says that the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. Okay? There's no rest for them day and night. And I want to be a little bit careful to assume, and Brandon and I have kind of hinted at this, and I'm still doing some study on my own, to assume that the torment for an individual person is eternal. Here's what I mean. There is eternal separation from God. Hell seems to be eternal. Does that mean that people are going to be burning forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and it just never stops? I'm not sure about that in the way that I was raised to believe. I'm still working through that. And even with what he says here, the smoke of their torment rises forever. It doesn't say that their torment is forever, does it? The smoke rises forever.
So where's the smoke coming from?
Well, the torment, but there's other people who are being tormented.
So you're not tormenting everybody at once, there's
Maybe.
six-
Yeah.
there's
Or
20.
yeah, it's, are we talking about, well, anyway, I probably opened a can that I shouldn't have. You know what? Forget I just said anything. Let's move on. No, I'm struggling more now than struggling is not the right word. I'm I don't know, intrigued and studying a little bit more now with just like the eternal actual punishment. Does that make sense? Like I think as you read through Scripture, there's like I said, when everything is said and done and the final judgment takes place and people go to heaven or hell, I'm becoming more convinced that the punishment for, if I was to go to hell, the punishment for me individually at some point is going to come to an end. Not that I'm going to somehow magically be saved and get to go to heaven and I'm just going to be, punished for a while, but just my life will even my eternal soul will cease to exist. I don't know. I'm still wrestling through it.
Back this up.
That's, I was literally, okay, so, and this is a good question.
Go for it.
I was like, what is, because this doesn't mention hell, and so it's
Mhm.
like, okay, where's hell mentioned?
Right.
And so it's like Matthew 10:28,
Mm-hmm.
and it says, "Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell."
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of agree with that, where it's like, hell is eternal, but maybe not the torment of others. Like they can
Right.
destroy, like Satan has.
The existence of hell is eternal. I don't know that my personal punishment is forever.
Right. Yeah.
But if, so,
So that.
wow,
means-
that just blew my mind away. But, so you're saying it's not going to be eternal punishment. It's that there's time in hell, there won't be time in heaven, but there's time in hell, and so when you served your 20 to life, you're gonna get out.
And that's what
You're gonna get paroled,
I'm
get
not,
Savior?
I'm not fully like definite.
Then where would you go?
I think you just cease to
What would
exist.
happen to you?
Just cease to exist.
But no, it's gonna burn forever and ever.
But that would be hell burning forever and ever, not you.
Right.
So what?
Why?
You're
If you go-
insignificant.
Why?
You go to
What?
hell and you burn up and that's the end of your punishment?
Maybe.
That sounds
Could
like
be.
purgatory.
Well,
It sounds like something different.
Mhm. I know.
I just don't know where you came from. Where did that come from?
Well, it's becoming a more popular theory nowadays. And if you look through scriptures, a lot of times it talks about how, the fire doesn't go out, the worm, all those kinds of things. But it doesn't necessarily say that the individual does. And I kind of struggle again, I keep using the word struggle. I'm just kind of wrestling with the if I'm going to be punished for my sins, I don't know. Does the punishment does the punishment fit the crime? I guess is what I'm looking at. Like if I
Like Hitler would have to stay a lot longer than.
maybe so. I haven't. I really shouldn't have said anything because I haven't fully decided on it. It's something that that there's some. Mm-hmm.
Because it's totally different from anything I've ever heard.
Right.
Like she said, you know, you can be prayed out of purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that?
No. I'm not saying
It has
that.
nothing to do with purgatory.
Mm-mm. No, because I don't think there is a purgatory.
Okay.
At least not by the traditional, Catholic tradition. I don't think there is.
Okay. So if
Not
there's no.
according to scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there. Sorry.
I'm not saying you have to buy into it. I'm
just trying to, well, it's like grasping a lot of other things. When you first hear it, you're like,
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
Yeah.
But I just don't know where the idea came from.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, reading some different authors and stuff, and just having conversations with people, and just knowing that's one of the reasons that some people don't want to buy into Christianity is because it doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem right that you would continually be punished. Like at some point, the punishment should come to an end. I mean, it does in our worldly lives, right?
But the punishment fits the crime. And if you've denied
But I didn't continue to eternally sin.
the life you had, you chose to sin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you just going to have to suffer through the, and there's no time. So how do you know when you
Yeah,
suffer
I don't
through
know.
time?
I don't know.
Well, in that rich man and Lazarus, I was just reading that
Mhm.
again. It says that you can't cross over that
Right.
chasm,
Right.
and so
I am not saying there's an end to your punishment and then you get to go to heaven. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying is there the possibility that the eternal punishment can come to an
all
end?
things are possible.
No. I went too deep into that and I apologize. Let me do some more of my own study and get my thoughts clear on it so I can present that a little bit better instead of just tossing that grenade and getting a bunch of discussion. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'll just stop. It's something to chew on and something to think about. I'll put it that way. And we can talk about it some more later.
And it's thought that way for quite a while.
Huh?
Yeah, I've heard you say that before.
Yeah. And I never take the time to fully, like, let me take a few days or weeks to really get into this, and I'll just kind of dabble in it for a little bit and then move on to something else. So,
So you're not going to preach on it Sunday?
no. Shoot, no, am I preaching on that? Okay, let me just point out a couple more things. So this drinking of the cup of God's wrath is actually similar to some other imagery. In Isaiah chapter 51, verse 17, the same phrasing is used. Jerusalem, God's people in Jerusalem are going to drink or had drunk from the cup of his wrath, which was describing the destruction that they were going to receive, from the Babylonians because of their disobedience. So as this angel is calling this out, it would still sound familiar to John and to the Christians of a Jewish background. And then as Isaiah 51, verse 17. And as we said last week, when we're in verse 11 of Revelation 14, where he says there's no rest day or night, and how the opposite of that is true, obviously, for the followers of the Lamb, for followers of Jesus. I mean, that's one of the things that Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you what? Rest. Okay? So the reason, that's, I guess, supporting what Jesus said, he came to give. And so if you don't come to Jesus and you aren't saved by his blood, or as the imagery that Revelation uses, if your robes haven't been washed white in his blood and you're not part of the followers of the Lamb, you have no rest, because that's what he promises for people to come to him. Yes, ma'am.
So,
Okay.
if you serve your time in hell, and you're here, I'm sorry, I can't get up.
Yeah.
So what if you go to heaven? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
say, Mariette's a much better person than I am. So, am I only going to get to be there a little while? I'm just going to get to be there always?
No, because it seems like the heaven is eternal life. So the life
Is
never
hell
ends.
eternal death?
See, that's why I need to work on that.
Well, it can also eternal death be ceasing to exist. That's eternal.
Yeah. Let me chew on it a little more, and I'll come. I won't.
Chewing on it really bad.
Yeah. I won't leave y'all hanging. I will do some more study on that and come back and address it, because I don't want to leave y'all hanging on that. So, let me do some more studying on it myself.
It's a good
I'll come back and talk about it.
thing to ponder, because it's like, for me, eternity is a reward,
Yeah.
and then with that, with like, you don't get to even try to come back.
Hmm.
Why would you want to come back?
From if you were in hell, like there's no
Oh.
like chance of anything ever changing. Like you just don't exist. You were irrelevant. Like that's an ultimate.
Which you would be eternally dead once
Yeah,
once the punishment
It's your
itself ended.
interpretation of eternity.
Hmm. So let's come back to it. I promise we'll come back to it. I won't leave that and never talk about it again. We'll come back to it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. 2 years later. Hey, y'all remember that one question?
When you do the conclusion, you're like, what are these questions?
Okay. Last thing on verses 12 and 13. Again, I think Brandon mentioned this last week in class. The patient endurance. It takes endurance to follow the Lamb and to patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commands and remain faithful to Jesus. So it takes endurance to live in this world and to deal with the power and the forces of Satan that are here in this world right now, and especially back in this time, the persecution that these folks were dealing with. It takes endurance to deal with all that, but there's this hope that the final victory is going to be for those, who follow the Lamb, which is what kind of the indication you get when this voice calls out in verse 13. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on, because the Spirit says they will rest. There's that word rest again. They will rest from their labor, and their deeds will follow them. What does that mean? Their deeds will follow them.
Good deeds.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be blessed.
What does it mean for your deeds to follow you?
Well, your
If your
reputation.
deeds are good, you get eternal life. If your deeds are bad, then you burn up.
Yeah, the imagery about the deeds following you, though, it's like, I guess reputation could be a part of it. The imagery from the Greek word is something that follows in a procession. So, you think especially back in ancient times when in the Roman culture for sure, and Greek culture probably too, when a conquering general would come marching back home, he would have a procession following behind him, and it would be his soldiers. It would be, I don't know, a lot of the whatever gold or just things that they took from whatever enemies they conquered. They would be in the procession behind them. Maybe even conquered enemies would be following along this procession, right? And so it was just kind of a testimony of as you look behind this person, look at all the things this person has accomplished. Look at all this
Light
person,
flashing in front of you.
or kind of following behind you. I mean, probably the best thing for us to think about is legacy, reputation. What am I known for? What can we look beyond just looking at me? What can we look at outside of me as an individual and see where I have touched and what kind of influences, whose lives have I touched? Who have I connected with? Whose life have I made better? And if we're living the Christian life that God wants us to, this isn't about us. It's not an arrogant thing. It's not about us going, hey, look at all the things that I've accomplished. It's just recognizing you can see it. You can see the good things following in the wake of someone as they move through this life when they are doing things that God wants them to.
Which is another confirmation of somebody walking
Mm-hmm.
with God,
Mm-hmm.
is the good deeds that are following
Right.
them.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
But I thought you couldn't earn your way to heaven.
You can't. That's what I was trying to clarify. This isn't about I have to have those good deeds so that I can get into heaven. It's just recognition that when I do good things, that's recognizable by other people. Put it to you this way: long time ago, probably at least 30 years ago, there was a guy named Ray Boltz that had a song, a Christian song called "Thank You for Giving to the Lord," and I mean it's just a song that he wrote, but he talks about having a dream and going to heaven with a friend of his, and all these people in heaven kept coming up to the guy and going, "Man, you taught my Sunday school class, and I'm a Christian because of that. You donated to this mission fund, and here's all these people that were saved because of that." And just kind of these different examples of here's something that you did, and somebody else was influenced by that. It made an impact on their life. Does that make sense? So but that person was not doing those things so that people would brag on him and come up and pat him on the back and talk about all the good things that he did. It just happened. It just like, here's all the lives that you have touched, and here's all the people that good things happen to them because you did good things. That's all I'm saying about this verse. And I think that's what the voice is proclaiming here. That those who do good things, those who stay connected to the Lamb and do the things that God calls us to do, it doesn't just benefit me. It blesses the lives of other people. And you can see it. I mean, that's what Jesus called for, right? I want you to be in the world, but not of the world. I want there to be a difference. I want there to be an impact, ripple effect. I want things to happen because you come into contact with other people. Not so that you can earn your way into heaven, but just because you are living with my spirit in you and I'm doing things through you. And that's going to be on display. That's going to be obvious, at least in heaven. Does that make sense? Okay. The motivation is not to earn my way in. I'm just doing what God has saved me and is calling me to do. And it makes an impact. It makes a difference, and you can see it. Thoughts?
So if you don't do any good deeds, what?
Well,
You'll burn temporarily. but
you
that
burn
lasts
temporarily. That's
you're
right.
okay.
That's right.
I think we do good deeds and don't even realize we're doing them when we're following God.
Yeah.
You know, a smile to somebody is a good deed because you might have blessed their day.
Yeah. I think that,
I mean, it's just as simple as that.
yeah. In answer to your question, Linda, about like if we don't do good deeds, what does that mean? I don't know that if you don't go around doing good deeds that God is necessarily going to condemn you to hell. But I will say, John says in 1 John, that's how we demonstrate what our love for God is. We do what He calls us to do. And what did we talked about this Sunday? What did the servant in Jesus' story in Matthew chapter 25? What did the three different guys that got bags of gold given to him? What did the one guy get in trouble for? Not doing anything. So, I don't know that it inherently makes you an evil person, but if you're not doing what God calls you to do and using the gifts and talents that God has given you, I think that's a problem for sure. But it's up to Him as to what He decides to do with that. But I think but again, I'm not earning my way into heaven, but I should be so moved by what's been done for me, and so moved by the love that I have received from God, that I want to show that love to Him by blessing other people and by making good choices, doing the right thing. Okay, let's keep going. 14. because I promised last week that we would get through chapter 14, and so we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Verse 14. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." Tracy, can you move that and shut that door for me, please? Thank you. Sorry. Where did I get to? Verse 16. So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And still another angel, who had charge of the fire, came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." And the angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. And they were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of, I've got 1,600 stadia. Is that what y'all have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
1,600 furloughs.
Furloughs. Okay. All right. So we got at least two different people wielding sickles here. So the first one in verse 14 is one like a son of man seated on a white cloud. He's got a crown of gold and a sickle in his hand. Now, when this phrase, one like a son of man, have we seen that phrase already in the book of Revelation? Everybody nod your head, yes, we have. Okay. Whether you remember it or not. So if you go back to chapter 1, there's a person who is described as someone like a son of man. I didn't write down the verse. I know it's in chapter 1. Verse 13. Among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down his feet, with a gold sash around his chest. And if you keep on reading, it seems to be describing Jesus. Okay? So, is this now describing Jesus standing there with a sickle in his hand, getting ready to harvest? A representation of him, yeah. Rosemary, you say yes?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Seems to be.
yeah, I mean, the intent, from my perspective, with the book of Revelation and the introduction of Jesus in his magnificent glory,
Mhm.
that ultimately God is going to put things upside down, right
Mhm.
side up, and all of the evil that we're having to contend with every day, God is going to take care of it.
Yes.
I mean,
Right.
the reality of the hope that we have
Yes.
in this whole book is just phenomenal.
Right. And there's going to be reward and there's going to be punishment.
Yeah.
So there's some people who think that this may be just an angel, one who looks like a son of man, especially that phrase, son of man. But Jesus referred to himself often as a son of man. Also, if you go in the Old Testament, Ezekiel was called multiple times by God or by an angel that was coming to Ezekiel and revealing things to him. He was called son of man. I think Daniel was called son of man once. So it's not just a term applied strictly to Jesus, but it's a term that Jesus used to refer to himself that I think represented both his deity and his humanity. He's a son of God, but he's also son of man. And also, when you look through the Old Testament, anyone who's referred to as a son of man, there's this human part of them, but they have a divine message that they are called to share that is coming directly from God. Does that make sense? Which is what Jesus did too, right? Fully God, but also with a message of grace and hope that he came to share. So I think this is talking about Jesus. There's some people that think it may be an angel, especially because he ends up receiving instructions from another angel, and Jesus would need instructions on what he needed to do.
Well, and also in verse 15 it says, then another angel.
Mm-hmm. But we've also that could be in comparison to like these other 3 angels that we just saw flying around calling out too. So I think it's referring to Jesus. It's interesting. What kind of crown does he have? A gold crown. And I don't know what kind of picture you have when you think of a gold crown. When you read this, a gold crown is on his head. But there's 2 different Greek words. Go back to the ancient Greek that this was written in. 2 different Greek words for crown. Okay. One is, we would pronounce it diadema. Y'all ever remember the old song we used to sing in church, bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all, right? Okay. Which I think comes from Revelation actually, but diadema, and that word is only used 3 times in the whole New Testament, and all 3 of them in Revelation. Okay. That's not the word that's used here. The one that's used more often, and also used in Revelation and other places too, is the crown that they would give to someone who won a race, to a victor in the gladiator fights. It's a victor's crown, usually made of garland, some kind of olive branches and different things they weave together and make this crown, or they would use gold or different items to make it look like that garland kind of crown, but that would be set on his head. So this crown is not about royalty and kingship. It's about victory. It's symbolizing victory. Okay? So the one who, the Son of Man, and we believe is Jesus, there are other times in Revelation, we'll see it later on, where he is wearing a crown with that other Greek word, where he's called King of Kings, and it is a crown of royalty. That's what diadema means, a crown of royalty. It's got jewels and all that kind of stuff on it. This is the victor's crown. He is victorious himself, and he is proclaiming victory for all that follow him. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
Why does it say one like the Son of Man then?
It's a good question. So it's just the phrase that John uses, and I don't know if it's. I think. Well, here's my quick answer, because I didn't do a whole lot of study on it. Here's my quick answer. What have we seen Jesus portrayed as so far, just in Revelation? We see him as a lamb. I think there's one other thing, but for the most part, the lamb. But we got this one like a son of man. I think it's a way for John. I think John is seeing Jesus in the same way that he saw him when he was his disciple on earth.
His human form.
Mm-hmm. And so that's my guess. That's my guess right now, without having done a whole lot more study on it. But again, it's also a phrase that would be familiar to John and to these Jewish followers, of this person specifically chosen by God for a specific purpose, as Ezekiel was, as Daniel was, and ultimately as Jesus was. But I think that's the other piece of it. He's not seeing Jesus as a lamb anymore. He's seeing him as what he knew him as, what he called himself as, the Son of Man, with a victor's crown on his head.
Wow.
That's my immediate answer. Wow. Yeah. Which should be incredible for John, to recognize him in that form. Then an angel comes out of the temple. Let me back up. Sorry. I was talking about those 3 other times that the other kind of crown, that crown of royalty, is mentioned in Revelation. One of them is in chapter 12, verse 3, when it's describing the crowns that the dragon is wearing. One of them is in chapter 13 and verse 1, where it's describing the crowns that the beast out of the sea is wearing. And then the third one is chapter 19, verse 12, which is the crown of Jesus. So, Brandon and I have been talking about how the dragon, these beasts, they make an effort to look like God, or to look like Jesus, or to pretend that they have that kind of power and that kind of authority. Even the crowns that they wear, they try to portray themselves as having power and authority like a king, but it just doesn't measure up. Okay? And ultimately, when we get to chapter 19, when Jesus is wearing his crown and they cry out, This is the King of Kings. This is the Lord of Lords. But again, here in this instance, it's more about the victory that he's won and that he's providing for the people who are following him. Okay? I probably spent too much time on crown. In verse 15, this angel comes out of the temple and calls out to him to reap because the harvest of the earth is ripe. Okay? So then verse 16, he swings his sickle and the earth is harvested. It's just really kind of a quick, and everybody knows what we're talking about with a sickle, right? Farm tool, curved blade, okay? He swings his sickle and the earth is harvested. It's just a real quick sentence because then it goes right on to the next thing that John sees. So what are we talking about if this is Jesus and he's harvesting the earth? I mean, he's not harvesting grain. What are we talking about here? Harvesting people, right? Yeah. Is he just harvesting the people who are saved and who are dedicated to him? You think it's the entire earth? It's everybody.
Because, well, because it talks about the wheat and the chaff,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be separated.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the impression that it had to be harvested before it could be separated.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me like if he was going to harvest it, he would have to harvest all of it and take what's good and,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to be roasted for a while.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, well, hold your finger there in Revelation 14. Go back to Mark, the book of Mark, chapter 4. Starting in verse 26. This is Jesus speaking. It says, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up. The seed sprouts and grows, though he doesn't know how. And all by itself, the soil produces grain, first the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head." Verse 29, as soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it because the harvest has come. And he compares, harvesting grain to the kingdom of God. At some point, you harvest whatever it is that's been growing. So people who have given their lives to Jesus, or who haven't, who have grown in their faith, or who haven't, everybody is going to be harvested. And the only reason I ask a question about is this just a certain number of people, because there are people who think that Jesus is harvesting just the people who are devoted to him, and this next angel that we see is harvesting all the evildoers, all the people who are opposed to Jesus. I think he's harvesting the whole earth. I think and I didn't write down the verse, I apologize, but he tells another parable about weeds growing up along with the plants. There's a farmer that has that happen, and his workers are like, well, what do we do about these weeds and stuff that are growing up? And he's like, let them both grow up together, and we'll harvest the whole thing, and then we'll separate everything out. So to me, I think this is Jesus, it's talking about judgment. It's talking about there's going to be a time where everything gets harvested, and then we'll separate the wheat and the chaff. We'll separate the weeds and the plants, and there will be a division between the two, but all of us are going to come before the judgment. But there's also, they're talking about the harvest is ripe. Jesus even said that to his disciples a couple of times, right? Look at the fields; they're ready. They're ready they're ripe right now. Let's be planters. Let's go. Let people know. And we tend to focus, even here, when you think about swinging a sickle and cutting these plants down, we tend to focus on the negative aspect of reaping, and we kind of see that even a little more in this next use of the sickle, where it seems scary. There's a cutting down, almost like a destruction that takes place, but there's something positive about the reaping as well. It's those who have served Jesus, who have been saved. We're finally going to be separated from all the problems and the troubles and persecution and everything else in the world. We are finally going to be harvested out of that too. and receive our eternal reward. So there's a positive aspect to the harvesting of the entire earth. Now, then we have this other angel who also has a sickle. Verse 17, but he's not going to be harvesting grain. What is he harvesting? Grapes, okay? So still using a sickle, and this is what, I didn't grow up on a farm, so I had to kind of clarify this. So there's a couple different kinds of sickles. There's the larger sickle, which is like, it's got a big long handle on it. You use both hands to swing it. Y'all have seen that before. Maybe used it before. This is one of those days we really need Sherry Swanson to be here, because I'm sure she's got stories about North Dakota and swinging a sickle or something, Yeah, I'm sorry. South Dakota, you're north. My bad. I always get the Dakotas mixed up. But there is, just a smaller handheld sickle too, which was what was often used in vineyards. Okay, you can't just swing this huge thing at grapevines and hope that you'll damage the grapes, right? So it's a smaller sickle that's used to cut off these stalks of grapes, and that's what's probably being described here. But it's grapes that are being harvested. But he's got this sickle in hand. In verse 18, another angel comes from the altar, and this is the angel. This angel is in charge of fire. Verse 18, still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called out in a loud voice to him. So, who is this a new angel, or have we come across this angel before? Who wants to venture a guess?
Came across it before.
Seems like. Okay. Could be the same angel that's in chapter 8. When we're going through the seals, remember the scroll and the 7 seals? And when the 8th seal is opened up when the 7th seal is opened up in chapter 8, begin verse 3, it says, another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of the saints, went up before God from the angel's hand. And then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth. And there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So, we already have a picture of at least an angel, maybe the same one. It says it's an angel that's in charge of fire. The one in chapter 8 is standing next to the altar, has a censer that he can scoop incense, can scoop fire with. That is also, a metaphor for the prayers of the saints. The incense is, the fire is, and he hurls that to the earth. So, could it be a different angel that's also in charge of fire? Could be, but we've already got kind of a picture of this person already. And so, there's some people that think this angel, who's in charge of the fire, this harvesting that's about to take place is God's answer to the prayers of the saints. Now, the only thing that we've seen so far in Revelation, as far as knowing what, or being given an example of what some of the prayers of the saints are, is the ones who are gathered at the bottom of the altar who are calling out, "How long, O Lord?" Do y'all remember that? How long are you going to let the earth keep going? How long until we get our vengeance for what happened to us? We gave our lives because of the message. We lost our lives because of it. And how long until we get vengeance? And God says, just wait a little while longer, right? So there are some people that say, well, this particular angel comes out from the altar and this harvesting is about to take place is the answer to the asking how long. Does that make sense? So the answer now, like, okay, the time is up. Now the harvesting is going to take place. And I'm fine with that. I don't know if that's exactly, what's happening, but okay. If that's the reason that this particular angel is called out, okay. It may just happen to be that the angel in charge of the fire is one that's given the message to go tell this particular angel to start reaping. But he swings his sickle and gathers the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine because the grapes are ripe. So again, it's time for this to happen. There's been, time waiting for this to happen, but now it's here. And then the grapes, this is where we get into some hard imagery. He gathers his grapes and he throws them into the great winepress of God's wrath. So, first of all, what are we talking about with a winepress?
That's how they got the juice, I guess you call it, out of the grapes.
Mm-hmm.
They pressed it in there.
And you can still find some places that will do this. For the most part, it's done by machines and stuff nowadays. But especially back in this time, you would have these huge vats, or it might even be made out of stone or something like that. But they would dump a whole bunch of grapes in, and people would get in and just start mashing them. And there was, for lack of a better word, kind of a spout at the bottom where the wine would flow out into whatever containers they were keeping it in, right? And that's a way to get the grapes separated. It's a way to get just the juice out without all the other, seeds and leaves and everything else that might be in there. So it's this mashing, it's the stomping to get this wine to flow. So that's the imagery. Now we have the winepress of God's wrath. So if we're harvesting the earth, so basically we're harvesting people and we're putting them into the winepress, and as the stomping, as the mashing is taking place, this is all happening according to God's wrath. What are we talking about here? Huh? I mean, it ends up, he describes it as blood, right? What is God so mad about?
The rebellion of the people. Because they had a choice. An angel went out with the gospel, eternal gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And they refused it.
Mm-hmm. This is not the only time in all of the Bible that God's wrath is talked about. This, again, a lot of this imagery goes back to the Old Testament. When God got fed up with his people and their constant rebellion and him constantly asking them to come back to him and him rescuing them and then still walking away and still being disobedient, still doing all the things they didn't want him to do, eventually he allowed destruction to take place. You're not going to continue to live this life anymore. And that's when the Babylonians came in and destroyed them. And if you read through prophecies, that is described multiple times as God's wrath. It's not that he wanted this to happen. It's not that he wants destruction to take place, but there has to be consequences at some point to our actions. There has to be consequences to the choices that we're making. Otherwise, God can't be a God. And God can't even be a loving God to rescue us from the hurt of the choices that we're making if there's not something to rescue us from. Does that make sense? So it's destruction that's taking place. These grapes are trampled, and it ends up, as Marilyn just said, what flows out of these grapes is blood. And it flows out as high as a horse's bridle, which most people would say, be around 5, depending on how tall the horse is, 5 to 6 feet, probably closer to 5 feet, 5 feet high. And how long? So, 1,600 stadia, or yours said furlongs.
Mine says miles.
Okay.
80 miles.
Yeah. So, somewhere, a stadia is about 600 feet. Okay. The Greek word comes from the length of a stadium. So if you think back in ancient Greek times when they're doing these athletic events, just the length of the race would be the equivalent of about 600 feet. So 1,600 stadia is about 180. Now you can look it up. Somebody will say it's 181, some 183. You can round up to 200, whatever. It's 180-ish miles. Okay. 180 some odd miles, 5 feet high, of blood flowing. That's a lot of blood. Okay? Someone did the math on that. Not me. But that would be just knowing that there's usually somewhere between 5 and 6, is it pints of blood in the human body? Okay, someone did the calculation on this. It would take 83 trillion 901 billion 117 million 930,000 crushed grapes, crushed people, to create this kind of a flow of blood, which is about 11,800 times the current population of the earth. So, probably hyperbole. Okay, this is probably just being, really just it's imagery. This is not literal. Okay, I don't think it possibly could be.
Can you repeat that? Because I think that's very interesting. I'll write it down.
Okay, you ready?
3 trillion.
83 trillion, 901 billion. You want me to throw the commas in for you? 117 million, 930,000.
How many hundreds?
It just got rounded off to the thousands, I guess. 83, 901, 117, 930, 000. That many crushed people to create that amount of blood. 11,800 times the current population of the earth. Man, I'm out of time too. Really thought I'd be done with this. So, let me just kind of tie a bow on this, if I can. There's a couple of different phrases I want to. First of all, this happens outside the city, right? All these grapes are in this wine press outside the city. That's kind of significant, okay? Back in, if you go back into the Old Testament laws, even all the way back into like Exodus and Leviticus, anything that was unclean, put that outside the camp. Even when they made sacrifices, the parts of the animal that weren't used in the sacrifice, they got rid of that outside the camp. When they built the city of Jerusalem, they built the temple. All the animals that were sacrificed at the temple, they took the remains that they didn't use in the sacrifice, and those were dumped outside the city. Okay, outside the city walls, in before and leading up to Jesus' day, was the Valley of Hinnom, where you took the remains of animals from the temple, but people also just from their own homes, whatever garbage, whatever refuse, that would all get dumped in this valley, and that's where it was set on fire. And there was constantly smoke coming up, which is where we get the word Gehenna, which we translate as hell. That's where we get it from. So there's constant fires, constant smoke, burning up all this trash, but it was outside the city. Where was Jesus taken when he was crucified? Outside the city. So there's some imagery here of the separation and the annihilation, the destruction that's taking place of these people. But part of it is recognizing their, if I can say, their uncleanness. They haven't had their robes washed white. They haven't given their lives to Jesus. They're not following the Lamb. And this destruction takes place, this wine press, the destruction of these people who are opposed to God, that punishment takes place away from God. Does that make sense? Okay. Here, you can write this down for next week. We'll start, I promise, quick, and then we're jumping into 15 because I got notes on chapter 15 too.
Kinds of punishment, because that was done away from God, but yet earlier we watched punishment in God's presence.
Yeah, with the lamb and them watching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if there's significance there or not. Yeah, this wine press and God's wrath taking place. This is not actually Revelation, not the first time that's talked about. So if y'all want to write it down, Joel chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Especially verse 13 says, "Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come trample the grapes, for the winepress is full and the vats overflow. So great is their wickedness." That's in Joel chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. And then also Isaiah chapter 63, verses 1 through 6. God is pictured there. It's actually God walking from a wine press after he's done some pressing.
Isaiah 63 what?
Verses 1 through 6. And he's asked the question, where are you coming from? And why are your robes stained? And he says, because I've been trampling out my wrath in the winepress. I've been destroying people who have tried to destroy my people. So, same imagery, again, that's used in the Old Testament, still being used here in Revelation. We'll start quickly there next week, and then we'll jump into chapter 15, okay? Whew. All right. Thank y'all for the time. I will do more study on the thing that confused you about. I will. I promise.
I will too.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it just hit me, blindsided me. I've just never even thought about it that way.
I know. I hadn't either the first time that I heard that possibility. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.